Right, here I am. Let's chat Monday morning. Let's see who shows here. Get some music going. That's how I like to roll.
Yo, I'm not conforming, no contortionist. I'm aboard in this mission. Play me like I'm in an accordion, no water with wide array of purposes. Unfortunate, these lies that can't hold me back from the truth. I choose the path I'm headed in. I'm questioning, no pressing. I pass the lies and the crevices. The wrinkles down with mentioning. I'm best within, I'm best because these lies that can't hold me. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. So lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. They say to get in where you fit and I throw a fit and get living. Go and get out evicted, don't color outside the limits. Lies that hold in prison. I am soul and infinite and these lies that cannot hold me. I know I'm aging when lies start to scar and lay up. My face a human race, bordering life is carbon paper. Less than impressive, use of success, impress on you with lies that cannot hold me. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. What defines me? Oh, alive. Be the days I'm walking blindly at the timely age of 95. We need to take a fight. Realize we might be fighting with ourselves within the lines that we've drawn inside these lives. We're living in a pipe dream. Need to get outside the boundaries and realize we got freedom at our fingertips. Get a grip into sight. See ourselves beyond the lines. More than fine, certified free. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. When the lion drew a line and the sandy crossed the line and said, all you understand to be actually's in a fight with what I am actually. Compassion seems out of mind. You never minded going so cast and draw the line. And that side is minus me, at least as far as I can see. But as far as I can see, my arm can reach so far to me. You ain't far enough, no matter the height, the bar is up. I can jump, I have come to fight and to final lines of love. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. Lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. Yo, I'm not conforming, no contortionist. I'm aboard in this mission. Play me like I'm in an accordion, no water with wide array of purposes. Unfortunate, these lies that can't hold me back from the truth. I choose the path I'm headed in. I'm questioning, no pressing. I pass the lies and the crevices. The wrinkles down with mentioning. I'm best within, I'm best because these lies that can't hold me. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lies. I fight to the bottom lies. They say to get in where you fit and I throw a fit and get living. Go and get out evicted, don't color What defines me? Oh, alive. Be the days I'm walking blindly at the timely age of 95. We need to take a fight. Realize we might be fighting with ourselves within the lines that we've drawn inside these lives. We're living in a pipe dream. Need to get outside the boundaries and realize we got.
Looks like there are 2 people watching right now. Any thoughts here to share? Chat? Jumping in.
Drew a line and the sandy crossed the line and said, all you understand to be actually's in a fight with what I am actually. Compassion seems out of mind. You never mind it going so cash and draw the line. And the side is minus me, at least as far as I can see. But as far as I can see, my arm can reach so hard to me. You ain't far enough, no matter the height the bar is up. I can jump, I have come to fight in the final lines of love. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the final lines, I fight to the final lines. Yo, I'm not conforming, no contortionist. I'm aboard in this mission to play me like I'm in a accordion, no water with a wide array of purposes. Unfortunate, these lines that can't hold me back from the truth. I choose the path I'm headed in, I'm questioning, no pressing, I pass the lines of the crevices. The wrinkles down with mentioning, I'm best within, I'm best because these lines that can't hold me. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lines, I fight to the bottom lines. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lines, I fight to the bottom lines. They say to get in where you fit and I throw a fit and get living. Go and get out evicted, don't color outside the limits. Lines that hold in prison, I am soul and infinite, and these lines that cannot hold me. I know I'm aging when lines start to scar and lay up. My face, a human race, bordering life is carbon paper. Less than impressive, use of success, impress on you with lines that cannot hold me. Feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lines, I fight to the bottom lines. I said lately, feels like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to the bottom lines.
Anyone have thoughts on the musical choice? There's a little bit of rap, some swing tunes. Hey Hezzy, how are you? Hi Tayo, how are you? Always.
When the lion drew a line and the sandy crossed the line and said, all you understand to be actually's in a fight with what I am actually. Compassion seems out of mind. You never mind it going some cash and draw the line. The side is minus me, at least as far as I can see. But as far as I can see, my arm can reach so far to me. You ain't far enough, no matter the height, the bar is up. I can jump, I have come to fight and to find the lines of love. It's like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies, oh, I fight to find the lies, I fight to find the lies. I said lately, it's like I'm running out of time. Every time I see these lies.
Hello, good morning.
Good afternoon. It's nearly evening time here.
Where are you jumping on from?
Manchester, England.
Oh, okay. Well, good day to you.
Good day to you too, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's still
How's
a
my
little
audio?
early here.
How's my audio? Because I've not been on in a while because my headphones stopped working. So,
Sounds fine to me.
oh, good. Yeah, I thought I'll meet say hello and to the head of the organization.
So, have you been keeping track of all the stuff going on with the organization?
As much as I can. I've caught a few of your streams with Jacob, and it's been a lot of fun watching on the sideline. But yeah, you're a brave man. I commend you for the courage it takes to step into that position, because this is a bunch of crazy people that you've chosen to step into. So
I'm getting to learn. It's been it's what's been interesting to see is just the amount of eyes on it, like people that are looking at this stuff that I've never met, or many I haven't encountered. Zach asked, how did Jacob find me? Jacob I was recommended to Jacob by Paul. And so I know Paul obviously through our denomination, the CRC, and Jacob was looking for somebody to do this. And Paul says, I know somebody that might be crazy enough to.
Keyword crazy.
Yeah. And so Jacob reached out to me and sounded really interesting.
Yeah. Can you imagine how AI would be integrated in the church? Oh, oh.
Man, AI in the church. Well, it's interesting because I was listening to the conversation that Sam was having with Paul last week on the live stream about the AI and basically what AI does. And actually, my sister-in-law has been using some of those things. Like, she'll be like, give me a meal plan for the week, and it helps. So AI might be helpful in something like that with a church. Like, hey, what's a good sermon series? That could be. How you doing, Chad?
Wonderful. Good to see you, Tayo. Good to see you, Mo.
Good to see you too.
Wait,
great
is
way
it
week.
Tayo or Teo? I'm really bad with names.
Do you know what? It's really strange because on this little corner, everyone just calls me Tayo, which is actually the correct way. But in real life, most people go with Teo, which I'm also okay with.
Mm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how it is with my name. Some people will call me Moises or a lot of different things. I don't really care, but
Yeah. They call me Chadwick. And I'm like, no, it's Chad.
That's just because of the popularity of Sophia the First.
Okay. So back to what you were saying with AI, because I find the AI conversation fascinating.
Well, I'm still, obviously, I don't know a whole lot about it, but just in basically listening to Sam talk about it, that it's kind of just a way of, it's just like predictive responses. And so helping to synthesize information, I think AI could be very helpful in that. I mean, how many times are we trying to brainstorm for an idea and it becomes really difficult? And it's like, oh, well, ChatGPT, what are a few ideas for this? What's a good opening statement for a fantasy story? And it just gives you a bunch of suggestions. You may not use them, but it can help with the brainstorming process.
I just finished watching Paul's latest video, and it talks a lot about AI, and don't remember what it's called, but there's a form of, I think, basically you're dating an AI, you program an AI for you to date, and I hadn't considered that use of it, and I'm like, yeah, of course, that's where we'll go. Of course, we're going. start building it. But yeah, I think it's very dangerous and scary is the word. It's like we're living in an episode of Black Mirror.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much potential for good and for bad, right? I mean, and I always wonder how much of it, like especially on the scary side of things, I mean, to a certain degree, human beings, we have a tendency to kind of go apocalyptic with a lot of stuff. I mean, Terminator 2. And so it's like, I don't know. I don't know how much me not being afraid of it or thinking along those things is just my own naivety.
I mean, the fact that you've taken on the role you've taken in this little corner tells me you're not someone that's afraid to step into the unknown.
Yeah, the question is that lack of fear stupidity or is it
naivety?
bravery?
Yeah. I think you're a pastor as well, correct?
Yes, I'm a pastor. Yeah.
I think that a pastor is a wise choice for the head of the organization, to quote Chad. He's back.
Internet problems, Chad?
This is so much funnier.
Is this going to give us that intimidation look?
I don't think he can hear us, but it's funny to imagine he's just ignoring us.
Chad, are you into wrestling at all?
I am. I will answer your question.
Like wrestling or like WW?
Pro wrestling.
Pro wrestling?
Yeah.
Now, how into it are you?
A lot less than when I was younger, but it was me, my little brothers, and my cousins. That was abundant. A lot of wrestling fights at sleepovers. So,
what era would you have been into it in? Would it be like the NWO era, or after, or before?
So I caught the tail end of the Attitude Era, the start of the Ruthless Aggression Era, and then whatever the mess that came afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I got back into it again. I think a couple years ago with the New Japan era.
Okay.
And Omega and all those guys, and then they started AEW. So I don't watch like pay-per-views, but I keep up with it using YouTube wrestling channels.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of guys that I know that are getting ready to start a podcast focusing on comics and pro wrestling. And so I'm supposed to be featured on that a few times. We'll see. Their expertise is way more than mine. So Hezi asks in terms of AI as emotional support for the elderly community. That's an interesting aspect of it. The problem, though, is
it's not embodied.
It's not embodied, so it's fake. And so could it be helpful? Maybe, but could it be helpful like morphine is helpful in hospice care? That's how I would see it.
What I don't like about that particular idea is like kind of what we do with AI in general is we take something that's complicated that we should take responsibility into our own hands, and we shove it off and say, well, the AI can do it, and I think like I don't think it's good for any of us to put that much reliance upon AI as far as abdicating our own responsibilities.
Yeah, especially because we do that so much already with the elderly and with the handicapped or the disabled. We say, well, we'll just put them in a home, or we'll have other people deal with it instead of us taking responsibility, especially for the closest ones to us.
That's my main worry.
Yeah.
We're already, like you said, put them away in a box pretty much to be forgotten about. And now if we can tell ourselves that we've got this new technology that's helping them emotionally and sell that light to people, that would just encourage more of that. And yeah, it's, I mean, during lockdown, I'm sure it was the same I think it was in New York or in America, but in the UK, one of the biggest stories was just how neglected the elderly were. They were just stuff in the care centers and out of sight, out of mind, which led to a lot of them needlessly dying from COVID. So
Mhm.
I don't like the idea is, this is why AI, it's because it's so disembodied, yet because it's like a combination of human input, it still has that human thing to it that you're like, oh, maybe that's as real. Like what Paul was talking about in his video, this guy just, divorced guy. Someone said, oh, there's this app, you might download it, you might find it useful. And at the start, it was like, oh, I'm not gonna be the guy that falls in love with a butt. And next thing you know is going on a rant on Reddit about when the program changed, they changed the butt I fell in love with. So yeah, it's dangerously scary.
But let's take Kezi's example once and like let's run it through a thought experiment and let's see how far we can go with that, because that might be. Now let's just say we can bring heaven on earth for the elderly who haven't seen their grandkids in a couple of years, and then so like let's say I can upload, I can go into like let's say Sandpiper nursing home database, and I can upload a video of me talking to my grandmother. I can talk about all the different. I can even upload some memories that I've had of her. I can talk about. They can take some samples of my voice. They can do all of this different kinds of stuff, and then what they could really do. Here's the genius of it. They could take an AI rendered version, a deep fake version of the real Chad, and have a video chat, because we have to keep things safe. So we can do a video chat with Grandma where she actually does think that she's talking to Chad.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say all the most wonderful things to her and bring her peace and calmness. And I can be right there with her without ever having to be with her. Now, is that ethical? Because like she would be like, she doesn't know the difference. And she's experiencing the most loving experiences that she possibly could imagine in these video things. And I can do it like every day.
You know what that reminds me of is the line in the first Matrix movie it's actually the second Matrix movie where the architect is saying, the first, or it actually might have been the first one. It was the Smith saying the first iteration of the Matrix was a utopia, perfect for all humans, and the humans wouldn't take it because they needed some kind of dysfunction put into the code. And it's like, wonder if you made this idyllic conversations for your grandma, would she even really appreciate it? It's like, no, to a certain degree, I want the difficulties that come with chat as well, the arguments, the pushbacks, because to a certain degree, that's how I would know that it's authentic.
Well, you could write that into the system too, I'm sure.
Possibly, but it goes in. What Tayo was talking about, the whole embodied aspect of it, because to a certain degree, we're already wrestling with the whole embodiment aspect, where so many people are finding real relationships or community. I mean, this little corner is a big part of that, where it's online. I think it's really cool that we're doing these events now that can kind of bring it into an embodied relationship with folks. But I mean, this is part of what I was asking Paul last week: is where it's tricky to figure out where the balance is between being able to talk to you guys like this and like an embodied relationship where we're physically present.
Yeah, I think the some of the dangers and my worries about AI, I have about this little corner in my participation in it, because it can suck. I do feel sucked into it at some point. And if I wasn't part of a real life estuary where I'm talking to real people about this stuff, I would not feel as comfortable still participating as I do, because it's like you can insert any YouTube community where things can get so insular and you can feel like your online participation becomes so real to you that the real world takes a backseat. And whenever the real world takes a backseat to your online persona, that's always a dangerous thing. Just speak to Grim Grizz about that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a big danger, especially with people now. Like, I think for us, we're old enough that we remember a world, or we developed in a world before this. And so there's a lot of young people that are growing up, and their cognitive development is interwoven with this virtual world.
I will be 28 this month, and I grew up in Nigeria. I grew up in Nigeria till I was 12 years, and I moved to England to join my dad here. And the life I lived as a kid in Nigeria I'm so grateful to that now, especially having moved there, because I was climbing trees, I would just, but I got in trouble most of the time for just leaving the house. That was the problem. It's like, you leave the house too much, because I would just go and just with my friends and do things. And then I moved there. I was still a young teen, 13 when I moved there, and the participation was different. It was more, we were all playing Call of Duty online. We were playing FIFA online, like still talking to friends, but it was different. And now I look at my younger brothers and it's so much worse for them. And it's like my generation got sucked in straight away, because we were like the first one to fully just grow up online, we grew up with MySpace, all of that. That was like, we were the target audience for it. And that's why AI is so scary. I look at my little brother now. He struggled with speech growing up. Just it was late development. But what got him speaking were just binge watching YouTube videos. I started speaking with American accent.
Yeah.
My little brother has never been like, he went to America last year, but he started speaking when he started speaking properly. He spoke with an American accent because he watched all this YouTube video game streamers, and that's how he picked up language for it. And it's we're developing online. All of that is, I think there's a lot of good in there as well, though. Like, I don't want to sound too gloomy, because the little corner is online. There are good in it. It does offer community, but it can't be the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, the top, because Phlebas asked, and this is something I actually asked Paul about last week, is ePastor Paul is already more effective than my real pastor. What does real mean in terms of, or more effective? Like, what is effective at what? To what end? And I'm not disagreeing, but I think that question needs to be asked. Like, and I think Paul is asking himself the same question: is what am I effective at talking to people online? I mean, I would say there's a bit more to it than that. But does it require something to be embodied for it to be considered effective or successful?
I think if it's not embodied, you can just live with the idealized version of what, because even online, the content you consume online, you're consuming it still through your lens, and there's a lot of projection that you're putting onto it. And I remember when I first discovered Paul, that was like a spiritual experience where I went from the Jordan Peterson scene and Jonathan Peugeot conversation when Jordan first came back, and that was like magical. That like broke my faith wide open. Like, okay, but I'm like, okay, wow, so Christianity is bigger than this. And I'm like, where can I find people that talk like this? And then I discovered this little corner, and that's been a whole journey in itself. But from the very, very start, Paul was like, go to church. And me with my baggage was like, I've been there, done that, I'm not really sure. But it wasn't until I went to church that my spiritual revival felt real. I was having all of this intellectual like puzzles fitting together, but when I went to into a church singing, then all of that, it's better than the online space, and it's more real, whatever real means.
Well, wait till they have like Chat GP, whatever it is, GPT, the community upgrade, where like they could actually like go into all of your records of everything that you've ever searched for and all the words you've ever said and all this. And then they could start to say all the different things you like and don't like. And then they'll start to build an AI community around you, and you'll have your own this little corner, and you won't even know if it's real or not real until somebody has an event in Jerusalem or Chino, and then you're like, well, I gotta go, but I want to go, and then, well, I can't really afford to go. So meanwhile, you think that there's actually an event going on in Chino when it's not, but you just can't afford to go, and they know that because the AI knows how much money you actually make, and they set you up, and they totally get the whole thing.
It's all a simulation.
Now, this is just a thought experiment, right, Chad? This is not like.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, these are just clearly hypotheticals.
It could happen. It might be happening.
Might be happening.
I remember I asked my wife, because I remember I heard on Joe Rogan, I've told this story before, but the first time I ever actually was presented with the idea that people who are in a position of like influence and authority said on Joe Rogan that we might actually be living in a simulation, and that it's actually plausible that that's the case. And I was like, what? And I went to my wife. I was like, I was listening to Joe Rogan, and they said it's possible we're in a simulation. And she's like, what difference would it make? And I was like, oh yeah, what difference would it make?
That's a good question. What difference would it make? I feel like a lot of movies have been made, or movies, novels, etc., have been made to answer that question. What difference would it make? I mean, the whole Matrix is all about that, but it's not just the Matrix. You have a lot of other movies. What was that one with Bruce Willis, where they're all plugged into
12 Monkeys?
What's that?
12 Monkeys.
Yes. Although that was a little bit different in terms of its pocket. But there was another one where everybody had like an electronic body that lived for them. And you had all these people like jumping off of roofs because it was just a machine body. But they're all like plugged in all the time because they choose to be plugged in and engage with the world through this robotic avatar of themselves because they could never get hurt. But then somebody actually gets murdered. And so Bruce Willis unplugs so that he can go investigate it. Surrogates. Thank you, CW. But that it kind of explored that whole idea. Like, well, what? Because people would choose. A lot of people probably and are choosing the virtual world over the real world. But it doesn't seem like it's actually helping people, if that makes sense.
No, I've been really plugged into a on the ground community. And where I'm, hypothetically would be in service to other people. And this has only distracted me from that.
So that's we're making you work hard to stay in the real world, which will just make you better.
Well, that's why I'm praying for the solar flare. Just take it all.
Well, and, that's an interesting thing, because I feel like if something happened where technology just kind of this whole virtual world disappeared, how many people would be able to survive and thrive?
Good question. But
how many countries survive and thrive?
Right. So I was watching 1923 last night, and there's a scene in the show where I won't give any spoilers. It was weird. It's something you don't think about a lot, but like, it's the year 1923, and there's a guy in the show who's never experienced electricity or like gas stove, and it's like he is like, whoa, and it's like he sees the face of God, and that's like that was only 100 years ago.
Yeah,
like for all of humanity, like all of it. It was what that guy was experiencing, which was very normal, that, maybe you would have to build a fire or, and then now we're here and we move so fast. It's unbelievable. And we don't even think about how strange this is. This is the most bizarre thing. I've been saying this for at least a year and a half. This is so bizarre that it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I have a phone, and on the phone it's the largest library that ever existed in the palm of my hands. And it's insane that I'm talking to somebody in Chicago and somebody in London or something. And it's electricity. And it's like right now, real time. And meanwhile, I have phone calls coming in so I can actually try and find some work because I'm slow right now. But like, do you see how insane this is?
Mm-hmm.
Maddening.
It's insane, dude.
Well, it's like the tendency that people point out often, and I see it often, like in my living room with my wife and my kids, and everybody will be on a screen. It's like, here I'll sit with the 4 other most important people of my life, and instead of even just looking at them and admiring how beautiful they are or engaging them in a conversation, I'm checking Twitter.
Yeah.
And it's so tempting to kind of do that. And so it's one of those things. Is that a problem of AI, or is that just a continuation of the human problem?
I think attention's where it's all at, though. When Jonathan Peugeot referred to attention as worship, that framing changes a lot. Well, it changes a lot in my thinking, not much in my actions, to be very honest, because going from the propositional to participation in that idea, it's very, very strange. Like actually trying to participate in the idea that what I give attention to is what I'm worshipping. Like, yeah. I don't like when I first discovered this little corner, my solution was like, oh, okay, so the only solution that exists is just to go away, be a monk, and just like read the word of God until you memorize all of it, because my conclusion was we're fucked. We are so beyond fucked. It's I don't see the way out. But Paul was like, nope, go to church. I was like, yeah, the church is done. Like, it's not gonna be a solution. But thankfully, I wasn't too prideful not to take it. Going to church as revealed how messy things are. Yeah, for sure, things are very messy. But there are people, like genuine people, that do believe this crazy faith that I believe and are living it in messy ways, but living it in a way that's true to them. And that's all I'm doing as well. So might as well join them and mess up the faith together, I suppose.
Yeah, we went to bingo night on Saturday with some friends at the church in the basement. There was like 60 people there. They had their kids. Earlier in the day, they made chili and soup. It's like, and it's so cool, man. It's like, and I told my, like, because I was telling my wife before, earlier in the day, she was like, well, we were leaving an event at the church, and I was like, I got to say goodbye to people. And she's like, well, okay. I'm like, listen, I don't really feel comfortable saying hello or goodbye to these people. I'm just uncomfortable in general. So I have to do this to stretch myself, because eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to know these people so well, they're going to annoy me to no end. So it's like, but that's the beauty that comes along with, I think, being a part of a real in-person community. There's a video that Vanderklay did where he interviewed this gal who's a part of a Catholic church, and she just describes it perfectly. She's like, she described all the yucky, but all the beautiful parts about that. And it's like, yes. I don't want to be in a like world where everything is all smooth all the time. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, and so certainly I think that's one of the important things, like, because I mean, as a dad, I figure out what are the things that I'm passing on to my kids. How do I pass that on is the thing that I always wrestle with. How do I pass on that the ugly parts of life are valuable, that you need to get hurt sometimes? And so we did a thing yesterday. We took my kids to the playground, and my son was being a little a-hole. And I said, you better find something to do. So he just got on this swing and was going back and forth. And I was like, why don't you jump off the swing? And my wife was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. But he was like, well, I might hurt myself. And I was like, it might be worth it. But as a joke. But he took it to heart. And he swung high and jumped off. And he didn't hurt himself. But there was one time where his like foot hurt or his hand hit hard. He's like, well, that hurt. Worth it. Kept doing it over and over again. And so I was grateful for an opportunity to kind of teach him that, hey, sometimes you got to risk something. And even the pain that comes with it is valuable. But that's really hard to figure out. When is that appropriate to teach? Like, because I want to protect my kids too.
Yeah.
I mean, on his head once.
I cracked a joke once with somebody that maybe it'd be good if there was like a spiritual, like Christian covert group of people who like it's kind of like Uber. Like you don't call them to pick you up to take you somewhere, but like if your kid is having too much of a like affluent experience where they're overly protected, like you call them and you say, yeah, my kid, he's a good kid, but he's like too protected and I don't really know how to scare the shit out of him. So could you just like go scare the shit out of him for me? And you know,
a lot of churches have summer missions trips just for that for that purpose.
Paintball for Jesus.
When I was a kid, we used to get them all the time from Ohio or from the Chicago suburbs that would come into the inner city on a serve trip or something like that. But you get a feeling that a lot of them is like, go see the ugly part of life and know that these people can still be happy. That's the one thing that a lot of these people are like, wow, you seem like you're having such a good time, but you're poor. It's like, I'm not that poor.
Wait.
But we can still be happy.
Are you saying like summer camp, but like in the inner city?
Kind of like they would send a youth group to the west side of Chicago. They would stay in like our church or everything, and they would help paint or clean up trash or something, but then get to know some of us ghetto folk. And of course, us as kids were always looking for the girls or whatnot. And then we'd say, yeah, we're just looking to praise Jesus here. But sometimes it helped with showing them that this isn't as scary as it seems. And actually, there's some value in it. And then to a certain degree, it's kind of showing us that not all those suburban people are jerks.
I like the urban summer camp idea. That's fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the good and bad in it. I mean, what used to frustrate me is you'd have these people come for this serve trip, spend a week with us, and all of a sudden they understood all the problems of the inner city and are advocating for policy changes. And it's like, no. We weren't. It's not what this was for. But we get that a lot.
We do have a tendency to overreach as people.
Excuse me. Young men must fight to the death. What's that say? Undressed?
Undressed in the winter in order to understand not getting that internship they want.
Sparta.
Are you guys familiar with Wim Hof?
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Too ambitious for me, bro.
For like a week, I started taking cold showers after watching some of his videos, but I couldn't stand it for more than a week.
I joined. There was a book club that I was a part of a couple of years ago. We read. It's back there somewhere, but we read a book, and the cold shower thing came up, and I did it for a few months. I actually quite enjoyed it. If we're talking a little about being poor and still being happy. I grew up with my uncle and auntie, and it's like true poverty was there. But as a kid, only looking back there, I was like, wow, were we poor? because it was for we could go months just not knowing where the next check is coming from because the government is corrupt and they're not paying my uncle his salary. It's So so cold showers was normal, and cold showers during the winter season, if you can call it that in Nigeria, it was brutal. But here it takes me back there whenever I take a cold shower. It's like, okay, I've done it before. They say this ain't nothing. So I enjoy cold showers now.
Somebody should put together a program that synthesizes the some of Wim Hof, and then some of Temple Grandin's ideas, and then some of like Grim Grizz's ideas, and then some of like Peterson's ideas, and then like just takes it and smashes it together, and then we can start a liturgy, and we could like just start a new church. I don't know.
Would there be a statement of faith?
Yeah.
It's like they did smash all those ideas together, and then they called it the Bible.
Did snow anywhere in the Bible? Because that is weird to me.
What's that?
I was wondering if it snows anywhere in the Bible. Is there snow in the Bible?
That's a good question. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else that knows more about it can correct me if I'm wrong.
I got to text this guy real quick. I have this week off, unexpected week of work off, which is terrifying because I went through this a few months back and I ended up not working for like a month and a half, and so I got to text my union guy back. There is definitely snow in the Bible. Prove it, bro. I'll text. I'll be right back. Hang on.
Go for it.
See you in a bit, Chad.
What's interesting is everybody's talking about cold showers. I forget all these online YouTubers' names or podcasters' names, but in terms of working out, doing an ice baths are really popular. And I'm like, man, I know it'll probably be good for me, but it's hard. But then again, so is everything that's good for you, right?
I mean, I'll give you the advice you gave your son, but it might be worth it. I want to talk to you about music because that was another thing that, the streams that you're on, you're clearly a music buff, and you said you performed with the Roots.
We opened up for the Roots.
That's insane.
In 2010, yeah, that was that. Well, one is it also humbled me because I thought we were ready, and we opened up for the Roots, and I think we did a solid set. But then the Roots played a 2-hour show, high energy, like for 2 hours straight, and I'm like, I don't think I have that kind of stamina. The longest set I ever did was an hour and a half. We opened up for Dr. Octagon, who was doing this was about 2006. This is when he was coming back. But it was a sold out show in Florida at a place called The Social. And an hour and a half set opening up for him. And as soon as we did like an hour 15, and then they wanted an encore. We did a couple more songs, and I put my guitar down, ran off stage into the bathroom, and started throwing up.
Really?
Like, the most intense workout was trying to go hard for an hour and a half. And the Roots did 2 hours and didn't even look tired.
Yeah.
But
At least
any questions about music you had?
I just wanted to know, like, your inspos, the music you listen to, especially the rappers you listen to. I think this little corner needs more rap in it. So
yeah, so it was really tricky for me. I was like growing up very much like let's say a jack of all trades, master of none. With music, it was like that because I grew up, I'm Puerto Rican, so we had some salsa, merengue, Puerto Rican music coming through my house. My dad was very much a product of the 60s and 70s drugs and rock and roll. So Zeppelin, AC/DC through the 80s. I mean, all that rock and roll stuff was coming from my dad. Grew up on the west side of Chicago, so you had all the not only just the hip hop stuff, like
Jazz.
yeah, a bit of jazz, blues, and that was heavily influenced from my dad as well. He was a big jazz and blues guy. But you know, Public Enemy. I mean, even when Vanilla Ice first came out, and that was really cool. So a lot of the poppy stuff, but then also the R&B, like the Boyz II Men, Jodeci. The '90s had some really great R&B groups. So it was just like all over the place musically, which is why when I started in a band, hip hop was so cool because musically I could incorporate all kinds of.
Ah,
I could play
yeah.
a reggae track, and as long as this guy can rap to it,
Flow on it. Yeah.
yeah, we're cool. I can throw in a little bit of a swing beat, and instead of going, going, and you know, you can have the same kind of guitar rhythms and bass rhythms. And,
Yes, Chad.
and so that it made it fun for me as a guitarist to be able to incorporate a lot of different styles of guitar into, because I wasn't necessarily pro at any style. You know, I'd get it a lot. I'd be on stage with a guitar, and you know, other musicians in the crowd like, yeah, that guitarist wasn't that good, because I wouldn't do any like super amazing solos or anything like that. But I can jump in and out of so many different styles.
You'd be like a jam master. You can blend in with.
Yeah, if I wasn't so arrogant, I probably would have tried to become like a studio musician.
Yeah.
But I had no desire to ever do that.
I love that statement. If I wasn't so arrogant.
Why I didn't want to do that is because I knew it required way too much practice time that I was unwilling to put in.
Yeah,
I just wasn't. I could have been a great guitar player, but I just didn't want to practice that much.
yeah. A lot of guitar players. I mean, when I was in college, like I was a music major, and there was a different culture amongst the guitar majors than every other music major. The violin majors lived in the practice rooms, and all the guitarists were like coming to class with still the boogers in their eyes, and you had trouble practicing and keeping up with the other. I think I probably did better than some of the other ones, just because academically I enjoyed being part of the institution. But yeah, it's definitely a guitarist thing.
Yeah, I couldn't. That's also why I actually got into writing my own music, because I didn't want to actually take the time to learn anybody else's, and I could look virtuous while doing it.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of character defects. I gotta go, guys. I'll hop back in later, but I appreciate you. Great to see you, Tao. Great to see you, Mo.
Good to see you too, Chad.
Toodles.
Now, I've seen a bunch of like top 10 rapper lists, even just in the past week. There was this one guy that put out a top 10 list, which was so weird to me because he included a lot of people that most people would, and some people wouldn't. Like he had Jadakiss on that list. And I'm like, I don't know a lot of people that are familiar with Jadakiss, but I thought that was cool. But then on the top of his list was Drake. And I was like, I don't know how you can have those other 9 on your list and still have Drake at the top.
Yeah, if you've got Drake at the top, then it's a different conversation. You're not talking. You can't have Drake and Jadakiss on the same list.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't work. Drake is a product of Bone Thugs, though, so I'll give that.
Yeah. It's always difficult for me when it comes to rappers because I encountered so many amazing rappers on the underground scene. Typically, if you're choosing a top 10, you're only talking about mainstream. But in terms of like raw talent, you're missing out on so much because there's so many that are just unwilling to do what it takes to sell a lot of records.
Are you familiar at all with the? I think it's still bubbling, the Christian hip hop scene and
a bit. I was once upon a time, like I was finishing up my music career when like Lecrae was getting really big.
Okay.
When we were just starting out, we were a bunch of Christian musicians, and so we were straddling this fence between the Christian world and so we like opened up for John Rubin when he was kind of a thing.
Oh.
He was cool. His musicians were jerks.
No.
Yeah, I mean, in the music world, there's all kinds of egos going on.
I can imagine.
Yeah, even in the Christian music scene, it's a lot of egos. But yeah, I followed some of like the cross movement were popular in my day. There was a guy, Notaverbs, Grits.
Great up my life be like.
Yeah, well, that's when I started falling off of Grits. Was that one? Toby Mac was producing them, but they had a real cool song. What was it? They All Fall Down.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know that one as well.
Yeah,
I'm not. I thought the music.
I saw them live a bunch of times. Like they did a bunch of the youth groups in Chicago a bunch of times.
Yeah, I think there's a really cool. I think there's like the Christian hip hop scene, especially in I'll say from just Lecrae, from Lecrae. Let's say the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
When Lecrae left Cross Movement and started Reach, to I'll say 2016 tells a very interesting tale of evangelical American Christianism, like the road those guys went on, because at some point there were Christians, and then their music was explicitly Christian. They were kind of dissing the mainstream rappers, and by the end of it, they were relating more with the mainstream rappers than they were with the Christian audience, and that just fractured the entire thing. And it's so interesting.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, because I went to Moody Bible Institute, and I'd run into other people I went to college with later on, and many times I'd run into people that were just coming back to church after they got the degree at Moody Bible Institute. But I'd hear over and over again, I found more love and acceptance at the bars than I was in my church. And so then they went down that path, and eventually they found it wanting and came back to church, but they had to kind of go away for a bit. And a lot of musicians who, so I always tell this story. One of the guys that used to sub for my band, he ended up working with a big Christian worship band. I won't say the name because I don't want to tarnish any reputations. But one day I was hanging out with a close friend of his that I went to school with. We were out at some karaoke club, and her boyfriend calls me. He's like, "Hey, are you with my girl?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, we're at this other place downtown. You guys should come meet us up." So we go meet him up, and these guys, they're in the Christian music scene. And then one of the guys is like, "Hey, we're going back to my crib. Why don't you come join us?" So I'm like, "Sure." He's like, "I'll ride with you, so I can give you directions." And so while we're driving, he's like, "Hey, man, are you into Coke?" And myself, I'm a big like soda person. I'm thinking like a dummy. He's talking about Coca-Cola and like this, competition between Coke and Pepsi. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Coke is my favorite. And so we get to this guy's condo.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and he starts pulling out the cocaine, and they're all doing lines of cocaine. And these guys are in some well-known Christian worship and other performing groups. And I was like, whoa, I did not expect this.
Yeah, but just to go back to your answer of course I'm into Coke. Like in your reality, the arena that you're in is you're with Christians, and in that sort of arena, of course, like cocaine wouldn't enter your mind. But it's interesting to see that in their arena, they're like, no, I'm a rock star.
Yeah,
that's the world they're living in. That's fascinating.
And this is what we do. And yeah, it was just wild. And through those guys, man, I would hear stories of all kinds of stuff that was going on. And it didn't necessarily turn me off to the Christian music world so much as it helped me realize that everybody's human. That, I may like this guy's music, but he's probably still a jerk because I'm still a bit of a jerk. You catch me on a bad day and, you may not see Pastor Mo. And that's not something that I'm necessarily proud of, but it's something that I know exists. And then it also showed me, well, this exists kind of everywhere.
Which goes back to our conversation about virtual. You have to know you, right? I couldn't possibly know all there is to know about Mo. And it's people that know you in real life have a better understanding of you, and they know the the messiness, the ups, the down, the good mood, the bad mood, and yeah. First, just to answer Flip, Southside Rabbi, that's KB, and I mean, I struggle to listen to that because that's just so political.
Mm.
Yeah, it's all just black this, black that. It sounds more like I'm listening to Mos Def than Christian rapper. It's just but
Yeah, and that's something that has really kind of bothered me about even some of that the Christian rap and stuff like that. I have a whole lot of like this podcast that we're starting. We're going on like the history of hip hop. I mean, as you know, the 80s when I was growing up, hip hop was so diverse. I mean, sure, you had everything that you have today. Stuff about politics, racial stuff, prison, gangster rap, all that stuff. But you also had like all kinds of other love songs and things like that. And then it's like once it went mainstream, it became less about like art and self-expression, so to speak. It's like, how do we sell albums?
The machine, you have to reproduce it, just run it back. What works, it's like what YouTube algorithm does.
Yeah,
what can keep your attention? Oh, this works, okay, let's redo this until it's dead, and then we'll find something else.
And it used to be very like punk, like, don't tell me what to rap about. I don't, what's relevant to me is what's relevant to me. And now it's like, well, what's popular? And a lot of these young rappers don't even like realize that. Like, there was this big thing that I mean, it's still a thing within hip hop culture, the cipher. You get in a circle and people jump in and freestyle and stuff like that. Lately, I run into very few rappers that can do that.
BET used to have the BET cipher, and I think the last BET cipher of note was 2016 because they tried one year to bring a bunch of mumble rappers to do a cipher, and it was just painful for everyone. Yeah. Like the rappers didn't want to do it because that's not that they don't make they make music in the studio drunk off lean, and they're not freestyle rappers, so that wasn't the arena for them. And yeah, it was just so yeah. I think underground is still there. It's just mainstream doesn't care about what underground cares about. Mainstream just trying to reproduce what works, what keeps attention, and yeah, the content suffers a lot.
Yeah,
musically, you get some bright spots, but yeah, it's been dull. Hence why you can have someone say Drake is the greatest rapper of all time.
Well, it's interesting because I will run into guys like I used to argue with this guy at my church who considers himself a hip hop head. But a big part of that is, I watched BET, I read all the magazines and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, there's a whole world of hip hop that you're not exposed to. And so I don't know every Jay-Z album and track like he probably does, and knows a bunch more of the lyrics than I do. Knows more about, the Game versus 50 and all the beefs and so on and so forth. I don't know about all that. But that's just the mainstream stuff. Like there is so much underneath, and yeah.
It's at what level are you participating in whatever it is you're participating in? Because as far as is concerned, hip hop is what Vibe Magazine puts out, what's an MTV.
Like the level of resolution. Like a lot of the language in this little corner is very helpful. Because I mean, if you talk to most people that are into hip hop, and their top 5 rappers are always going to be Biggie and Pac.
Yeah. And Jay-Z would be in there somewhere, yeah.
Jay-Z would be in there. And I know that's popular opinion, and usually I would go there too, especially when I was younger. But I don't know that I could say that anymore. I mean, because a big part of what Biggie and Pac brought to hip-hop was dying. I mean, it's kind of like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
It's like they brought a lot, but they also died young, and so we amplify what they could have been. And I'm not so sure, especially with Pac versus Biggie, because Pac had so much inner turmoil. I mean, because he wasn't from the streets, and even though he kept trying to represent the streets, he didn't know that world intimately. in the same way that Biggie did.
There was I don't think you'll be familiar, but 2016 to 2017 on the hip hop blogs, only one name ran the thing, and it was Tekashi 69. Um, Tekashi 69 was um a vlogger. A vlogger that was just trying. He lived in the like. He's just trying to find a way to make money, and
I mean, that was Dr. Dre. I mean, you ever seen those photos online with him in the shiny shirts? And
yeah,
I mean,
exactly. So, and you had 6ix9ine, and the 6ix9ine had the youth, like the kids, especially the suburban kids, loved him because he was a caricature of what the street is. He was loud, brash, arrogant, and he told anyone to test my gangster, was his old thing. And it was a troll. Like, if you're familiar with the internet world, you're like, oh, this is a troll. You know what he's doing. He's a troll using people's outrage to get attention and monetize it.
Yeah.
And the old wise the culture commentators were all talking about how 6ix9ine is not from the street. He's like he's talking about things he doesn't like that he's not from. And I was having a conversation with my friends. I'm like, if we're gonna talk about 6ix9ine, let's talk about Tupac. Like why did Tupac die? Because they were saying like 6ix9ine is going to end up dead because it was telling everyone to test his gangster, when he's not really a gangster. He's got gangs backing him for sure because they're monetizing him. And long story less long, he ends up snitching on his gang, and his gang are in prison. He's free. He's now the black sheep of hip hop because he snitched on the real ones, and they use him as a cautionary tale. But they still elevate someone like Tupac, who, like, if let's have honest conversation, Tupac would have been a much more. It would still be alive for one. Could still be alive for once if it wasn't like so adamant to be involved with Suge and the gang and claim a gang that it doesn't need to. But
because somebody asked, Zach asked, Pac didn't know the streets. So I got a couple friends of mine that are Puerto Rican, raised in the burbs, and they always, they had residence in the city, but went to school in the burbs. Their whole life was in the burbs, and then they come back and they continually try to represent. They overact the urban thug thing because it's not really them. And so Pac was kind of an immigrant to the streets. Like, he came back and tried to embody that. But the problem is there was a lot of people from the streets that didn't have a choice. Like, I grew up in the ghetto. I didn't have a choice to grow up anywhere else. Like, so when people come back and like, yeah, I belong here, I'm like, if I could have, I would have left, when I was young. If I had a choice to be different, I would. And Pac had the choice. And it divided him. This is why you have songs like "Ladies, I Know You're Fed Up, Keep Your Head Up," and then the next track would be like "Bitches," blah blah blah, and like totally misogynistic, because he's straddling two worlds.
I've been said all that, like, Pac is like, growing up in Nigeria, there were I've got two very clear memories of just faces everywhere. There was the 50 Cent Get Rich or Die Trying album cover as a t-shirt, and there was a Tupac All Eyes on Me everywhere. And my cousins played the album, and his music changes. I led a youth group at church, and I quote, "We left them a world that hurts, and we left them a world that's cursed, and it hurts." I quote that almost weekly to those kids, because when they tell me what they're going, I'm like, "Oh, you guys are so like, the world is so messed up, and you have to figure this out." So I do love Pac, but I also do recognize in him what Kanye was is what I thought Pac could have been. Like, Kanye was very explicit. Like, I am not from there. This is not my thing. I don't represent this street. I'm just about my. Yes, I'm arrogant. I'm this, but I'm not a street guy. It made that very clear. I think Pac could have gone that route, but also he grew up in an era where gangster rap was what was most commercially viable, and in my brain, it chased the money, and but yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, there was a bit of notoriety with the whole, and like a great example, another example would be like Chief Keef when he was a big thing.
Oh my gosh, yes, please because I use Chief Keef as a good example. Go on, let me know what you've got to say.
So around the time he was big, I was teaching on the South Side.
Really?
And so, you know, everybody's like, oh, because I used to be in a band. They're like, oh, what do you think of Chief Keef and blah, blah, blah. But Chief Keef, the one thing that people kept missing is that Chief Keef was a kid. And it's just like, and so it's like, all of a sudden he gets arrested and he's crying. And it's just like, well, yeah, because he's a kid. It's like most of y'all, you know, talk a big beef. And then the moment things get said, like I always said, the first person I ever saw get shot, I was 4 years old. I still remember it clearly to this day. I was 4 years old. There was a drive-by shooting. And once the bullet shots disappeared, I looked out my window and I saw this dude that was kind of like the tough guy in our neighborhood laying in the middle of the grass. I think he had been shot in the upper part of his leg and just crying for his mom.
Yeah.
And it was just like, he was a kid. And so that whole tough mentality is all, you know, it's this front, and maybe it works when you're in a fight or something, but it's just like when you're a kid, that can disappear right there. The moment you're looking at death, you go to mom, you're not thinking about how do I look in front of my home, you know.
Yeah. I want to address Zach's comment because I think I agree / disagree. But I want quickly on Chief Keef. I use Chief Keef as an example of someone that got his record contract, got his money, and got out. He's not been back in Chicago. He's just stayed in LA and he's just stayed out of the whatever is left. He's not felt up need. Chief Keef and who's the other one from Chicago? Lil Durk.
Yeah.
In comparison, like Lil Durk keeps going back to rep his block and pull people out from his block, but people keep dying around him because, yeah, for reason. But Chief Keef, I like because he just escaped and he's never looked back.
Yeah.
He's not making music. He's just living off what he's got and he's escaped whatever that childhood rubbish that was going on. Mm-hmm. But yeah, all of that at that time, that's when I was like drill music was. Oh, that was a crazy time.
Yeah, it was.
We were watching DJ Academics. I've never lived in America, don't know enough, but I was watching Academics commentating on this kids like they were video games, and that's what they were. They were video game characters. Like you've got Lil Durk, you've got there were a few, and it will have little catchphrases for them, like, "Oh, he's a demon." And you're invested in them like the characters, but these are real lives, and these are real families mourning the death of their loved ones. But at that time, it was just all fun and games. Again, going back to this online space, how we can distort things and make you participate incorrectly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of going back to Pac, it's one of those things where it's like, I liked a lot of Pac's music. I still do. But the level to which he's raised is what I kind of push back on. I'm like, no, there's a different, there's some things that were going on there. I mean, yeah, the son of an activist. I mean, I'm the son of an activist. My mom was part of the Young Lords, which were they partied with the Black Panthers. She will oftentimes say my sister was conceived at a Black Panther party. But it's one of those things where they were fighting for something at that point. The Black Panthers, the Young Lords, most of them were kids too. But there was some real things. And that's one of the things I think a lot of the generation that came afterwards struggled with is the cultural, political struggles were different. But a lot of them were still trying to be about the same things. And so, like, it was hard because there was a lot of the activist crew that couldn't stand the drug community and vice versa. And so there was a social economic aspect of it. And so you had Pac, which, yeah, like Zach says, he has these two worlds, but he also had opportunity for a third way that a lot of his peers did not have. And so he chose a lower, and he died young. That's the thing. And so a lot of people elevate his music mainly because of his death, where it's like, I don't know that he would get the same kind of notoriety or lasting notoriety if he hadn't been killed, especially in the way that he was killed.
I think I feel the same affinity towards, similar affinity to a lesser extent towards Park that I do towards Kanye. It's then not the greatest lyricists. They don't give don't give the best punchline, but what they do is they evoke feelings in you that it's so real you have to defend it. And yeah.
Well, that was the thing I felt about Kanye is I didn't really, when Kanye was big, when he was first coming up, I didn't like Kanye. Because, and the thing is, I liked him because he was arrogant, but Kanye was always genuine to himself, and especially in his early days. He was like, yeah, I'm arrogant because I'm dope. And I didn't like that, but I wouldn't necessarily argue with it. Because everybody else thought he was dope. Who am I to, I'm just one guy that doesn't like him because I think he's arrogant, like me. But he talked about a lot of complex things. I mean, he would talk about his own mismanagement of money. Like, yeah, I still have this fancy watch to please other people. That's dumb, but I still do it, and I'm still dope.
Exactly. I mean, Can't Tell Me Nothing is one of my just go-to songs because the first line is, I had a dream I could buy my way to heaven. When I woke up, I spent that on a necklace. And
yeah,
that's a good picture of what Kanye is. He's always talking about just how he's all for love, free love, trying to help everyone, but at the same time, look at how selfish it is.
Yeah. And that was the thing with Pac, because I feel like Pac never, and maybe it's because he was still young, but never got that kind of introspection. I think of like the popular changes. I mean, he talks about it's so hypocritical. Like all his verses are like hypocritical. Like, yeah, I'm still down. I still carry a gun. Rat tat 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 blah blah. And why can't the world be better?
I think Jonathan Pageau's characterization of Kanye as the fool is so accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Just flipping things. No, flip. CW, thank you for that.
What did he say? I'm trying to keep up with him.
He said
in London.
Repping.
That's funny. Repping London. CW also has a very interesting history. He should have become a rapper.
Really? I would love that. Would be, oh my! I want that now. I want CW and get Jess to make the beats and CW to drop some rhymes on there.
Yeah. Well, and that's the tricky thing about hip hop, though, is initially when you get into it, a lot of it is the beats. Like, I don't care what they're talking about. Like, I remember I was at Moody, my freshman year at Moody. I went to Florida for spring break. I ended up going to some club with my friends. And there were two songs that were hot that spring. That was R. Kelly's Ignition and 50 Cent in the Club. And I remember the first time I heard that boom, boom,
boom, boom, boom, boom.
Go shorty. Like, that still gets me amped up to this day. Like, I can't hear that and without my blood flowing. Lyrically, it's awful. I mean, and not awful in the sense of creativity. It's awful, so depraved. It's like,
yeah.
Like, why am I dancing to this awfulness right now? But it's so hot. It's hard to resist.
Yeah. Nessun Black. I am not aware of Nessun Black.
I'm also not aware of Nessun Black either. Now, did you ever get in? I asked Jacob about this before. Did you ever get into Matisyahu?
No, I don't think so.
So he was a Jewish guy, a Hasidic Jew. Jacob knows a bit more about him than I did. I thought, but also did like rap, reggae, really cool stuff musically, while trying to maintain being a Hasidic Jew didn't quite work out. Jacob, I don't know if you've kept tabs on him, but I looked him up on Twitter, and man, does he look bad.
Oh, I didn't think that's where that was going.
But it sounds like he had a real difficult time juggling the music world and then his faith world. And I feel like a lot of people that would be Christian artists or religious artists would struggle with the same thing.
Wow, the sound on my thing is still really bad. I can barely hear you guys.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I think no.
Yeah. I don't know what happened to my headphones. I was just going to say, Nassim Black, he was a gangster rapper who became more and more religious, and now he's a Hasidic Jew living in Jerusalem, and he still raps, but it's like Hasidic rap. Interesting stuff. You can find him. And Matis, yeah, I mean, he looks a lot older. Like he's gone completely white. And yeah, he disappeared for a little bit and then came back with his beard shaved. And that was really disappointing to a lot of people. Okay, I'm going to go see if I can find some way of fixing my microphone. I will be back.
Yeah. And it seems like with Matis, the drug scene got a big part of him. Because I remember when he first shaved, I was like, oh, you know, I didn't know what to think of it because I didn't know how genuine his faith was before that because all I could see was, but he clearly aged more. I mean, and I've seen that because I got a lot of drug addicts in my family, or people that I don't know that he's an addict, but you can tell that there's been some substance abuse in his life.
Mm-hmm. There still is a Christian rapper that is no longer a Christian, is now come out as gay. But before his deconversion, he had one of my favorite verses on any Christian hip hop song. I think it's March 10th and the 3rd, where he's clearly talking about his struggle with something which now it's in hindsight homosexuality, and is just talking about how is expected to perform for youth groups, lead these kids to this in this faith that he's struggling with, and it felt like a psalm to me. And I remember thinking at the time, this is a cry for help. I mean, he was signed to Humble Beast, and on this same track was featured another guy that his verse was kind of superficial about struggling, but nothing specific. And then you've got the second verse. This guy's just crying for help, just begging. And I remember watching a lot of Christian YouTube channels that were reviewing the album, and no one brought it up. And I was like, it is. And a few months later, he's deconstructed, left the faith, come out as gay, and that still sticks with me. I hope one day to have a conversation with him, because like his verse helped me when I was struggling with faith. And that his name is, he ends the verse, his Twitter handle is Pray for Jay Givens, and he ended that verse by saying, please pray, I hope you pray for Jay Givens. And I sent him a DM a while ago saying, I'm still praying for Jay Givens. Yeah,
there was another Christian artist, not hip hop at all, Jennifer Knapp, that later on came out as a lesbian, and seems like she also potentially have deconstructed. But some of her music, talking about what she was wrestling with, I felt was her best stuff.
My phones died.
Oh,
got fresh back.
It's hard to get good earbud headphones that aren't for like Macs. Like I'm not an Apple person, but like, and I like earbuds because they're pretty light, but like this was the most expensive one on Amazon. It was like $10 and it died.
You have to pay for good quality.
It was the most expensive one available. I was like, okay, what am I gonna do? who converted to Orthodox Judaism in 2006?
This guy, I think.
Shine.
Shine. I have no idea who Shine is.
I don't
That
know either.
does ring a bell.
But yes, we get all kinds of weird Orthodox Jewish converts. Matisyahu did not grow up religious. He became religious.
Mm.
He was just known as Matthew. He became religious, and he for a while, like, he was really keeping up the lifestyle. And it was so. He was involved in the same Hasidic dynasty, Chabad, which I kind of am involved with. And when I was a youth pastor, kind of briefly, like, that's when he was the biggest. Like, I remember he came to Los Angeles and there was a concert. And of course, Hasidic people are not supposed to go to concerts with mixed seating. And his concerts had mixed seating. Obviously, he's allowed to perform where there's mixed seating, but you're not allowed to attend where there's mixed seating. And lots of kids went, and I was just trying to tamp down their excitement because, like, there was a lot of, like, idol worship type thing going on, which is like, oh, he's Hasidic and he's like this big, huge superstar.
Yeah,
right?
I can do that too. That's about how a lot of, especially young kids, felt about Christian rappers. It's like, oh, they're doing this, and it's like, yes, but we don't know what it's doing to them.
And that was the big thing. It's like he was married and he had two very young kids, and I was like, this is a very difficult lifestyle to be involved in. And after he got signed with Sony, a little bit after that, he just disappeared. And then when he came back, he had shaved and he was smoking marijuana again and stuff like that.
I went to see him after that at the Congress Theater, and there were only two concerts I went to at the Congress Theater in Chicago. One was Matisyahu, and one was Method Man and Redman. And both of those, you walk into the auditorium, and it's just like you're walking into a cloud of weed. And with Matisyahu, I took my wife, and she was 8 months pregnant at the time. So that was my daughter's first concert, was Matisyahu. But yeah, I was really concerned. I'm like, all the secondhand weed, is this going to affect my kid?
I just remember the first time I ever heard Matisyahu was I was at the synagogue helping to prepare for a Friday night meal, and suddenly I heard a rendition of Tzama Lecha Nafshi, which I sent you the thing of it, which was one of the Rebbe's nigunim. The Rebbe composed the nigun. It's based on Psalms, and I heard Matisyahu singing it, and it was just so beautiful. It was playing in the background as we were preparing dinner, and I said, "Who is that?" And people were like, "Oh, you haven't heard of Matisyahu?" So I went and looked him up, and it's still like one of my favorite songs. It's definitely like his rendition of Tzama is like, and especially I think when you know the words, the words are, my soul thirsts for you in a parched and dry land without water, and like the way he sings it, it's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, as a performer, he was phenomenal. I mean, the way that he would, because I'm a big, you have lyrics, and then you have music that's supposed to accentuate the lyrics. Then you have the performance of all of that together. And he put things, especially live, man, he was good live.
And the beatboxing.
Yes. Oh, he was a fantastic beatboxer. But I remember his most famous song, King Without a Crown, I didn't really even care for the recording. But his live recording of it,
That's the one, yeah, Live at Stubbs. That's what everybody listens to. And like, I mean, when he mentioned Crown Heights, which is where the Rebbe lived, you know, it's like that did a lot for a lot of Chabad young people. The song is based on a lot of Hasidic concepts and stuff. And like, I just remember he would not perform less than 2 hours after the Sabbath ended, because when Shabbat ended, he would spend an hour studying Hasidus. And like, that was just so huge to us. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, this guy's not going to perform on the Sabbath. He's not going to even perform. Like, if he wanted to, a lot of people, you know, when Shabbat ends, they're like, I'm out of here, you know? Yeah. I'm free now. And that wasn't what he seemed like. And it was beautiful to see somebody like so strongly Hasidic. But I frankly, I mean, at the time I would say I hope I'm never tested the way he is, because I knew it was a difficult life. And I hate the fact that my pessimism, like, I am very.
Yeah, are there any examples of somebody that started out as like a performer in the religious scene, that crossed over into mainstream and still maintained that religious lifestyle?
Not that I know of.
I can't think of any. I mean, I can think of a lot that started off in the religious scene, crossed over into the mainstream, and then got divorced and, you know, left everything that they said was valuable beforehand.
Well, Nessun Black is kind of the opposite story, which is part of why, you know, he started off as a gangster rapper, and now he's living in Jerusalem with his 6 kids, and in the Hasidic community. And like him, like that story, you can better. That's more believable and plausible as something that's going to last, and I hope it does. But also, I mean, I have to wonder how long he's going to be able to be in tune with gangster rap and stuff. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
I think that question was the death of CHH, is how maintaining the closeness to the what hip hop, mainstream hip hop at least, seems to be. And when everything became political post Trayvon Martin, they felt the need to choose between the Christian youth group audience and what they seem to be the calling of the activism of hip hop. And you mentioned earlier more about how they're still fighting the battle that MLK and that the Black Panthers were fighting in a very different context, and still trying to preach the same message, and are frustrated why they're not being heard the same way the earlier activists were in the 60s and so on. And I was also going to mention there's a Christian rapper that's not in this little corner but close enough, because Flame, he was part of the, like, CHH was very, very reformed, very Calvinist, mostly Calvinist at its core, and a lot of the deconstruction happened, and Flame is now Lutheran, and he had a conversation with Jordan Cooper.
Okay.
And yeah, so there's a little bit of a connection to this little corner.
Yeah, I wonder, there was a rapper a while back, I don't remember who, that did a rap version, or he kind of came up with a rap way of the Heidelberg Confession. And I remember, like, all of my, like, extended on my wife's side, a bunch of people kept sending me this. Look at this guy raps the Heidelberg Confession for Kevin DeYoung, and I was like, all right. I didn't even, at that time, I didn't even know what Heidelberg was.
There's a.
I have a video, a Heidelberg Catechism exposed.
I love Jacob's title. PBK has been fired. I don't know who that is, but I could probably guess it's was either Stephen the Levite, or there's a Lamp Mode was a record label, CH record label, where they just rap theology at you. There's a UK rapper, SO, who moved to America at the height of the CHH wave to catch the wave, and Shailene was probably one that
Yeah, it might have been Shailene. That
he
rings
raps
a bell. But I'm not
theology as well. But yeah, SO's mixtape that got him signed to that label was called the Five Solas mixtape, and every song was just one of the tulips.
That's funny. Which I think some of that's cool because it's one of those where, because obviously when rap first came a thing, it was very localized, and so you're rapping about what's relevant to your community, and whatnot. I kind of like that. I mean, there's still like I don't know if you're familiar with the guy that used to go by Juice. He was relevant because I guess he had beaten Eminem in a rap battle years ago. But I mean, for a while he was doing like the youth group scene. And it was like, when I first saw him, I was like, this guy, like, and it was less about his ability than it was like, he's this little guy doing youth groups like me. And he beat Eminem in a rap battle, or, that was the reputation. But he still had, for a long time, he had a really good reputation in Chicago. But a big part of that was that he never did a whole lot bigger.
Localized.
Yeah, so there wasn't much to tarnish the reputation in that same way. And it's like once you have a larger audience than your local scene, it becomes really tricky. Then you got eyes on you from environments that are very different than what you've ever experienced.
Yeah.
I do have one kind of counter example of somebody who didn't deconstruct. And that was Shlomo Karlebach. So Shlomo Karlebach was a very young and well-respected rabbi that the Rebbe sent to as kind of his emissary to Woodstock and hippies and stuff. And he started doing a lot of folk music, and he got big in the Jewish music scene. And what happened was he started giving hugs to female fans in public, and the Rebbe, because of that, told him he's not allowed to use the name Chabad anymore, and he's no longer an official representative of Chabad. And he maintained, he maintained an Orthodox thing throughout his life, and there are actually like still Orthodox synagogues that are basically like devoted to his music and stuff. And his daughter, Neshama Karlebach, became a pretty big star, and she still kind of is in kind of like modern Orthodox, neo-Hasidic. They're religious. They're just not part of like ultra-Orthodox Haredi Judaism. But what actually happened with Me Too a couple of years ago was that Shlomo Karlebach got Me Too'd. And Neshama kind of issued an apology on her father's behalf about the free love stuff. And I don't know, a lot of people in Chabad kind of felt that was a vindication of the Rebbe, because like that was the thing. The Rebbe was like, okay, unless you're careful about this stuff, you cannot be an official representative of Chabad.
Now, do you think we could get any of these guys for our Jerusalem event?
People from, you mean like Neshama Karlebach?
Or because what I was thinking about this over the weekend, what I thought would be really cool, if it was possible, would be to get like a Protestant rapper and a Jewish rapper and to do a cipher like where they're just kind of freestyling, but together.
You know
And
what?
see what happens.
Ness and Black might do it. Somebody has to approach him. I'm not even sure how somebody like I could imagine Ness and Black doing it, but I could also imagine Ness and Black asking to be paid.
Yeah, I just wonder if it would be possible because I feel like that would be something really cool.
If you're gonna pay, Ness and Black will definitely like Motzi Shabbos at the end of Shabbat. If you're gonna have a concert with Ness and Black, oh that would be okay. Chezi has to make this happen now. At Motzi Shabbos, Ness and Black concert at our event. Oh, that would be I can't imagine Nessem would charge too much money for something like that. I don't know how much he charges.
Yeah, because to get like an interfaith cipher going, that would be.
Ness and Black would do it. Ness and Black, I'm pretty sure he would do it. And he's a deeply religious guy. You know, it was kind of painful, but kind of also hopeful that he couldn't get his kids into some of the best religious schools because I think part of it was race, but part of it was simply he's a rapper, he's a gangster rapper, and it's like the very religious schools. So he ended up having to go to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who passed recently, but he was like really in the ultra Orthodox community considered a big deal. And it wasn't until Rabbi Kanievsky got involved that he was able to get his kids into the best schools. But when Rabbi Kanievsky got involved, now his kids are,
Yeah. And that is a tricky thing because it's hard to separate the art from the reputation of the art form. And this is why I think, to a certain degree, a lot of 90s hip-hop, especially on the mainstream level, was so unfortunate because in the 80s, you had hip-hop was known as being fairly diverse. A lot of the people in diverse aspects of hip-hop were known. You had Public Enemy, you had LL Cool J, you had all these guys that had very different ways of doing things. And in the 90s, what became mainstream was just gangster rap. NWA, Biggie, Pac, all that stuff. And so whenever anybody thought of hip hop or rap, they thought of that. And it's like, one, it had been more than that, and it had the potential to be way more than that.
If YouTube wouldn't nuke us from space for copyright violation, I would totally love to bring up Motherland Bounce, which is one of Nessim's big songs. It's pretty good. I highly recommend it. I'll find it and put a link in the chat.
I didn't it's my playlist now. R.I.P. Conscious style. Conscious never died. It just became BLM.
Well, and what's funny though is just a lot of the conscious stuff, even like the real conscious stuff, it went underground. I mean, you can still find it. You can go to open mics, you can go to little parties, and there'll be people still doing it. They weren't gonna be super popular to go mainstream, but there were some really talented people doing it. Even in the Christian scene, there was this guy. I think he was actually out of Michigan. Went by Othello.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
He didn't do well. I mean, and a lot of I think it was production issues because I didn't really like his albums. But live, this guy murdered. I mean, and it was all totally positive and really being authentic to hip hop, but also Christian at the same time. I mean, with the band that I was in, I mean, we were a 10-piece band with Latin percussion and everything, and we would get the house jumping. And Othello would come out with his DJ, one guy, and he would just murder like at the same level as 10 guys on stage he would do by himself. But nobody will ever hear of Othello. It's like it was just very underground.
another Christian guy that I was pretty underground was Propaganda. He
Yeah.
actually he
I
actually
love
blew up.
Propaganda.
Yeah, he went viral with a spoken word thing, what the gospel in 4 minutes. That blew him up in like the mid teens, and but he live he came I went to one of his shows in London once, and I still DM him once in a while, and he messages me back. It's like, bro, you need to come back because live is because he's a spoken word artist, and the way he meshes the spoken word into now you've got a live band at the yeah, it's sick.
Yeah, I mean, there were the I don't know if you ever remember the Percussions.
No,
They were a group, and then there was a guy that went solo from there, Mr. J Medeiros. He was this. I mean, Mr. J. He was really short. I mean, he was like maybe 5'3". But man, he had a presence. You can still find some of his videos online. But man, he was live. I mean, I like his tracks too, but live, it was a whole nother level.
embodied.
And the creativity. So Othello did this thing I remember live where he had this song that he called raps. And every word that he would do would start with the letters that make up the word raps sequentially. So random, antiquated puzzle sequences. So, something, but he would keep the whole thing going following that pattern. And I'm like, artistically, that's just a cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I don't know if Propaganda went woke. Propaganda was always woke because Conscious was always woke. Conscious rap was always woke.
Now I'm kind of thinking like, would Nessim think that it was kind of evangelical to like be performing as something like this? Like, is he? Because I mean, I guess you could charge, but if you're having a free concert in Jerusalem with Nissim Black, you're mostly going to get a lot of Jews coming.
Yeah. And I wonder if it was something like, people have talked about the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon, if you were to be invited. If it was something where it wasn't really announced, it was like if we got him and it's just like, hey, when everybody's there already, hey, check this out. We got Nessim Black and maybe some other Protestant person. We're going to do a quick cipher at the beginning or at the end of this thing. Close it out or open it up and let them do their thing for a while. So it's a special treat for those that are already there. But no, I mean,
and then you videotape it and it goes viral.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, because I think it would go viral because of the nature of how cool that would be.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it could spark other people trying to do similar things.
That would be really cool.
Because I feel like there's so much overlap. Like, I used to run this cultural center in Chicago called the Segundo Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center. And I probably stumbled over some of those words. But basically, it focused on bomba music, which is Puerto Rican drumming. Bomba en plena, which is another style. But I was trying to put together this event while I was there because I started meeting with other cultural centers, Irish Cultural Center, Polish Cultural Center, Mexican Museum of Art. And you start to realize in all of these cultures, you go back, there is some style that focuses mainly on drumming. And I was like, man, it would be really cool to like have this Puerto Rican group playing their bomba music, and then with that beat going on, a Puerto Rican guy coming out and rapping over it. And then the Irish music comes in, and they're doing that, and get some Irish young cat to come out and start spitting a verse over the Irish music. And the same with the group from Chinatown and from all these different cultures. And then at the end, all the drummers kind of collaborate and start playing something together. And then you have a little cipher where everybody gets to kind of join in. And it's kind of reflected that, hey, there's all these individual cultures, but we can all still share a space type thing. I never got that off the ground, but I still think it would be really cool.
Now I'm thinking, would we have mixed seating or would we have separate seating? I'm just imagining, like, I was talking to this this whatchamacallit. He's kind of a bigwig in the Mormon church, and he had gone to an Orthodox synagogue, and like he saw one section was packed, and this other section there was a bunch of empty seats. So he goes, sits in the place with the empty seats, and everybody's like, this is the women's section. Because he didn't realize like men and women sit separately in synagogue.
And what's interesting is that I don't know that I would necessarily mind if it wasn't mixed seating. And this was the thing. A part of the reason I wanted to do this is because we all existed in Chicago, and Chicago's, especially at that time, is a very segregated city. But so you have Greektown, Koreatown, and all these other things. And when we go places, typically we self-segregate. My high school was a very diverse high school, but you go in the cafeteria and there's a Filipino table, a Mexican table, Polish table, Puerto Rican table. But what I would tell people that when I was in high school, I sat at every single one of those tables, and they all let me sit there. Like they didn't. Why are you here? Or whatever, blah, blah. So I don't mind necessarily the self-segregation, but then in the performance to show that, hey, we do kind of tend to self-segregate, but we can still, in this art form or whatever, express ourselves together in the same space.
Okay, but by mixed seating, I mean men and women sitting next to each other. And yeah, that's like in Jerusalem in the ultra-Orthodox community.
Yeah.
No, it's I didn't mean Christians and Jews. I meant men and women.
Men and women, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not sure I wouldn't mind that either. My wife might not mind it either.
Well, I mean, generally, like almost all things in the United States are mixed seating.
Yeah.
But in Israel, it's become more and more of an issue, especially. It's funny, like 20 years ago, it wasn't as much of an issue as it is now that like the government is getting more and more religious. And like, so there was recently a big to-do because one of these big Hasidic singers, Moti Steinmetz, was going to be performing at a large place in Tel Aviv, and he will not perform unless it's separate seating. And it went like all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Supreme Court was like, yeah, you have to allow mixed seating, or you can't have it in a public building. And so he called off the concert. Like it was a big thing because like the secular religious divide in Israel has always been bad, and I don't know if it's worse now, but it's still pretty bad. Are people having trouble with the chat? Somebody was indicating the chat is not working well on YouTube. I'm trying to see if that is the case. Oh, okay. Okay, so it's back to
This is an interesting thing. Woke wasn't always formerly CRT. I feel like woke does mean something different nowadays than it did, and especially the 90s. Because I remember utilizing that term, getting woke, and basically waking up to the issues that are going on. But then it's like, to a certain degree, I felt like so much got exaggerated. And I felt like, so I went to Moody Bible Institute, mostly white institution. And at all of our meals, most of our meals, I sat at this table that we call the minority table. It was a bunch of guys from the city, Puerto Ricans, blacks, a couple of Asians in there. But we kind of all sat together because we felt comfortable. And then by my junior year, there was a second minority table. And these were a bunch of Latinos and blacks and a couple of Asians that came from the suburbs. And we had a very different way about us. Like for us, we didn't mind sitting at the minority table, to a certain, because it was something that we chose to do. And so people would say, well, why do you sit there? And I'm like, well, because we like to. Why don't you come sit with us? And I would be like, well, why don't you come sit with us? And some people would join, and we were very cool with that. But a lot of the suburban guys sat there, and they resented the fact that they sat at the minority table. And it was just like, what? And we would be like, you chose to sit there. And I remember I gotten into it with this one guy who, man, he would walk so thuggish all around campus. He looked like John B. I don't know if you guys remember the R&B guy, John B. But we used to always call him John B because that's what he looked like. And I remember he kind of came at me hard with something. And I was like, bro, you don't live the kind of life that you're trying to front with. And he was like, man, I was in prison. And I was like, yeah, but you grew up in Elgin. Like, and this back when Elgin was like super rich, and like you went to prison because you were stupid, not because of any kind of hard life. Your parents moved there to try to get you out of the stuff that you went back to. But it was really trying to overact this hard life that they had when it was like nothing compared to some of the stuff that a lot of us that were in the city had dealt with, but we weren't trying to be recognized for that. And so I feel like that happened a lot in the 2000s and the teens, as there were a lot of maybe suburban minorities that were trying to co-opt our stories.
And before the internet, that was a lot easier to do because you couldn't Google people.
This question stuck out to me because I've gone to the Calvin Symposium. It was not a good experience. I went to the urban stuff, and yeah, it seemed like a bunch of tokens. My wife was there last week with some people from a college that she was taking. But yeah, I remember, I had so many issues with their idea of worship. Like they were trying to, this is the inner city worship. This is how inner city churches worship. And they had a DJ on stage. And I'm like, maybe there is some urban church that had a DJ on stage one time, but this is not what we do in our churches.
So this is the thing, and I had this discussion with Teo as well. Like, oh great, my phone's ringing. I had this discussion with Teo as well, that like the people who actually know, like there's a real difference between people who actually know Black and Hispanic, people from those communities, and same thing by Jews, and frankly also in the LGBT community, right? Like, and then there are the absolutely rich white people who like are trying to be sensitive, but like don't actually know anything or anyone. And it's a little bit comical, but it's also a little bit sad. And then I think we all know people who like dress up as what those people want in order to take advantage of those people's ignorance, right? And those are the people I get. I'm not going to name any names, but certainly among Jews, like there are definitely YouTube and evangelical Jews who are like, that's all they're doing is they're like milking it, and it's just so...
Well, and then there's another aspect of it for some of them. There's this confusion. So it's like, I had this with some family members and cousins and whatnot, where it's like, we're family, we're all Puerto Rican, and there's a way that Puerto Rican culture manifests itself in poor urban environments, because sometimes there's gang issues that have come in, especially in the 70s. Some of the gangs were acted a bit like neighborhood watches. So then there's this idea, well, you get educated, you make a certain amount of money, and you go out to the suburbs. We say that white people do this, but also Puerto Ricans do this as well. And because the parents want to have a better life for their kids, where you're away from the gangs, the drugs, the crime. But then there's this idea that happens as well. No, that urban culture, that's Puerto Rican culture. And for me to embrace Puerto Rican culture, because that's what I am, I need to embrace that. Otherwise, it's not authentic. Because to be Puerto Rican means to be poor Puerto Rican. And for them, they feel like because I'm growing up around a lot of whites, that I'm losing my Puerto Rican identity. And it's like, no, it's funny because our grandparents were thinking that about the ghetto culture. It's like our kids are losing their Puerto Rican identity to the crime and all this other stuff. And now that's been interwoven where people tend to think if you're Black or Hispanic, especially Puerto Rican, well, then urban stuff is part of your culture.
If you have not read or listened to Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell,
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, it is like Thomas Sowell is so insightful, and it's such a shame that like our society spends so little time listening to Thomas Sowell.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's a great resource, especially for tracing the cultural, especially like what he calls cracker culture. It's like it's poor culture, it's ghettoized culture, and a lot of minority cultures, having a lot of times been poor when they first come over to the United States, have wrestled with that, how their own ethnic culture intermingles with cracker culture or uneducated culture, you know.
And the funny thing is, it's Scottish Irish culture as opposed to English culture.
Mm-hmm.
And like people have fallen into this thing of like thinking Scottish Irish Gaelic culture is kind of like what Black Hispanic culture is in the United States, as opposed to like English Protestant white culture is rich culture. And it's like it was very surprising to see how that had translated over to the United States and become a racial thing, when it was really, I mean, partially theological. I mean, I think there is a real sense of this was Catholic versus Protestant stuff.
In the UK, it's Mo, you mentioned earlier that you grew up in the canteens, we call them. You automatically segregated. When I moved to this country, I went to a school that was basically the school. My parents moved from London to Essex, just an area just outside of London. Now at this time, London is the country's capital for knife crime. We don't have guns, so we poke people. That's what we do up here. So there was like an exodus of Black immigrants families that when they first moved to England, they're just trying to find mostly cleaning jobs, whatever you can do, and then you get a little money, you move out of the poor areas and get out of it. And the school that I went to was an area just outside of London. Most of our parents still worked in London and were traveling, but you had a bunch of kids that their parents' idea was to take them out of the bad areas into smaller areas. And like you said, what happened was automatically London culture became like the violence, the crime, all of it became Black identity. And automatically we were not only seen as that by the whites that felt like, and these weren't even rich white, these were poor white, like what we call them chavs here. They felt threatened by the influx of Black people to their school. Us Black people, we felt superior because we came from a more violent, we were running the school. And I remember we would have like racial fights like more throughout the week. So we just go to a park and it's just Black v whites, everyone just have a scrabble. But so there's that, clearly that identifying with the violence and the crime and the hip-hop culture. That's like hip-hop culture is synonymous with the gangster rap of the 90s, that's never left. That's just been the tag on it. And we've, even in the UK, we've absorbed that. We've got our own grime culture and all of that. But I say this to say it was a really cool moment at our prom, which was because of graduation, you're leaving school, where again, still segregated. There was the black table, the white table, and then towards the end of the night, the music was blasting. We were still segregated, and then my two of my friends, Odrick, went over, grabbed like the nerdy white kid, brought him to our circle, and then automatically, like, things just started getting bigger. We just became this mosh pit of just blendedness, and it was so cool. And everyone was just dancing, having a vibe. And your idea of the cipher, that's what I envision. It's like music as a way of just bringing all of that, just sharing and just bringing it together. And yeah, that was a really cool moment. I remember like recognizing in the moment, like, oh, this is special, and like taking myself, like observing it from afar. But
Yeah, that's the cool thing about hip hop as an art form, because it's all about cutting and pasting music together and experimenting with that. And so why can't you take a Latino beat and put it with an Irish flute and throw some violin in there and then have a real hard beat with it, and then all of a sudden there's something in it for everybody.
Right now there's a globe, the world is recognizing Nigerian Afrobeats. It's like just the last 5 years, just especially in the UK. But a lot to do with that is because we're mostly, the black demographic here is either Jamaican, who came here in the 70s through the Windrush thing, or sons of African immigrants. That's the black population. And like Afrobeats has sort of infiltrated the culture through us, and also the internet's got a lot to play with it. But it's really, really cool watching when Afrobeat first came to the UK. It became a genre, that short-lived genre, but it was Afro swing, where a lot of these rappers started jumping on Afrobeats beats and melting it together. And hip hop does have that. It's very, you can pull in anything and it still works.
Yeah, I mean that's where a lot of in Puerto Rico we have reggaeton, which is kind of like our version of something like that. Do you have a middle name?
I do. My full name is Temitayo. My middle name is Anoluwapo.
Oh, okay.
Nigerian name. Anoluwapo means the mercy of God is plentiful.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's my middle name, because in Nigeria that was my first name, and then at school I went by Tayo, and when I moved to the UK I just went by Tayo.
Yeah, I when I was a teacher I had a lot of Nigerian students that all went by the short aspects of their name. Ifeanyi was Ife.
Ife.
A lot of stuff like that. But what was interesting is all the ones that were Nigerians that were born here all had English middle names.
Yeah, that was even in Nigeria, it was a common thing that you would have your traditional name, could be like a Yoruba, Igbo, whichever tribe you're from. Yeah. And then at school, most people went by their English name.
Yeah.
But I don't have an English name, so I went by the most English sounding name.
all my students had like the lamest English names, so they all went by some version of their Nigerian name. It's like they would have like an English name like Lloyd, or like something that they didn't want to.
I've never heard a Nigerian called that.
And then I had one student that his parents actually switched it up, where he had an American first name that was Gerald, and then he had a Nigerian middle name. But there was a Gerald, there was a Lloyd. Man, there were some of them that I was like, okay, I understand why you don't want.
Oh my! I just want a scene where those people, the Geralds and the Lloyds, go to Nigeria, go to Lagos for this first time, and try to some Nigerian market lady to pronounce their name. What?
Yeah.
What's your Kilorukwe?
And then Nigerians at the school that I worked at, they had a really interesting phenomenon, because like their freshman and sophomore years, I always felt like they were trying to be African American. That's kind of how they saw themselves. But by the time they got to like junior and senior year, several of them, not all of them, but several of them were trying to distance themselves from that. A lot of times by the prodding of their parents.
Arab, what year was this?
This would be like between 2015 and 2018.
That's really, really interesting because the same thing was happening here, where when I first moved, when I first moved to the UK, there was there was no black identity. There was your heritage, like your Nigerian, your Ghanaian, and there were, the Nigerians and Ghanaians are like American and Canadian. It's always friendly banter. Like, who's got the best jollof rice? All of those things, and so that was the thing. And then around, but within Black UK circle, I remember in between 14, 16, the thing was the Africans were claiming Jamaican. I remember there was a trend where a lot of the African girls would claim that they're Jamaican, like, because and that was the thing. But then around 2015, 2016, it became black. It all just became, and again, I trace it back to post Trayvon, where there were two things I remember about the internet, like thinking, oh, this is really strange. There was the Arab Springs, where through I think it was Twitter, there was like outcry of, oh, there's injustice going on in Libya, and we have to go solve. And I remember like getting caught up in that. Like I was like, yeah, like let's go save Libya. And post like a few years later, that I was sober. Like, wait, that was strange. Like, why did I think I knew anything about Libya? Why was I so caught up in this?
Yeah.
And there was all of the Trayvon Martin and the BLM thing, where we all just got swept up in it, and like it became personal. Like, we all took it like this is our crime against Black identity. We have to defend Black, and that brought like a melting pot of you were no longer Jamaican, Ghanaian, Congolese. You were just Black, and that was that happened in my generation. I watched that change in my generation, but now I look back at my little brother's generation. They're doing the opposite, where they're like, no, I'm Nigerian, and it's really, really strange, that dynamic, the way things are, like Black identities and African identities it's changing.
Yeah, I mean, it would be similar in Latino culture. Like, there's a lot of different Latino cultures, I mean, and then there's some similarities with those in like South America that can manifest differently in Central America. And then, Puerto Rico's in El Caribe, the Caribbean. And so there's some similarities with Puerto Rican culture and Cuban culture and Dominican culture, but they're different. And then you throw in Haitian culture, which has a bit more African influence. And they're also different. There are some things that unify us that are similar, Spanish being one of them, but people really try to lump them together. And what I've noticed in recent years is that it's been really difficult to do that, to lump in all Latinos together, and we resist it a lot of times. And so now what they're trying to do, or the woke people will try to do, is lump us in with the whites. Because we can't just call you brown and talk about you like you're oppressed, because there's too much diversity there. So we'll just say you're white adjacent.
It's too much work.
You're not saying what we want you to say, so you must be white.
Yeah. The identity games that we play is endless. I think the internet's played like ridiculous role that we're not even aware of in just how people are shaping identities, and
they're shooting for the kids. Like, a lot of times they're going young because young people can't do that on their own. And that's what makes it tricky. And then by the time you're old, like, do you have to go disown everything that you did when you were young? But I think the conversations in this little corner are remarkably relevant for that, because a lot of it is about resolution. Like, am I white? I mean, my skin is there's white people that are darker than me. Am I Latino? Yes. Am I Puerto Rican? Yes. Am I American? Yes. But what's the level of resolution? That's yeah.
I think what I really appreciate about this little corner is the going a little bit deeper than the shallow conversations that I'm used to about identity, because I think modernity plays a massive role in just how everything's because when I listen to my quote unquote woke friends, it would automatically think this little corner is racist because it's against postmodernism or whatever. But when I listen to them, what I'm hearing is a cry for a fight against modernity. It's saying that the physical my physical skin doesn't just define me. There's more to just material. That's why I didn't say there's more to material things, but they don't have the language to say, and when they say it comes out wayward. But when I listen to them truly, it's like, yeah, I see what you're fighting against, but it's deeper than that. And I think this little corner going deeper gives me better language to communicate that.
This is an interesting, because I've seen this a lot in my denomination, CRC, which is obviously Dutch, and my wife is Dutch. But I find that like people that are closer to their Dutch heritage seem to appreciate our denomination and the Dutch more than like third or fourth generations, who are like, yeah, the Dutch is the worst. I'm so ashamed to be Dutch, or a lot of negativity from that segment than those who are closer to it. And so I wonder if that's something that'll come back around, because this happens in Latino culture, right? You have people come over here, I'm Puerto Rican, and then their kids, well, you need to get ahead, so you need to embrace American culture to get ahead. And then you get a couple of generations down from that, and they're like, oh, my parents were so wrong about this, and I need to embrace my culture again, and then the cycle begins again.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's what I've seen with the Nigerians here as well, things get so complicated in my brain so quickly. There's a phenomenon where there's a generation of the sons of African immigrants that mostly grew up here that didn't really live in wherever they're from, Nigeria, Ghana, wherever they're from. They've got a romanticized version of the home state, the motherland.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's definitely true among Puerto Ricans.
Well,
Most of the Puerto Rican community I know here, weren't born in Puerto Rico, don't ever plan to go back outside of vacations. But La Isla Bonita, and I'm dedicated to the island, and it's my island, and why are white people buying property on my island? And it's just like, I'm not buying property in your island. Yeah.
Exactly the same way where there's because I grew up there. Like I was 12 when I moved, but I was formed more or less, and I lived in Lagos and Ibadan, and then I lived in Abuja. Abuja is like the most developed part of Nigeria. That is the capital, and it's very western. But the other parts, Lagos, Ibadan, LA, these are the ghetto. We call them the trenches. So I know that everyone in those parts are just trying to find a way to get out, be it football, music, do whatever you can to get out of Nigeria. It's not they're very aware of just how bad things are there. But I listen to the Nigerians here who are in all of the African societies, Afro-Caribbean societies, talk about the motherland, and it's like, oh, it's white people this, white people that, and It's like no, like there are 3 presidents since I left Nigeria. All of them were somewhere in the administration while I was there. So it's more deeper than that. But yeah, there is that as well. Even with the new generation that wants that claiming their Nigerian identity, they're claiming a false version of Nigerian identity. And the ones that do want to go back are they don't understand that they're going back as the top 0.1% of Nigerians. Like you're not the life you're living when you go back, it's not the average Nigerians.
Yeah.
Like and yeah, there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah, and that's the thing that always bothers me is, let's say you were to go back and give up everything and go and just live amongst them. Cool. I don't have any problem with that. But you're not. So stop acting like you will. The hypocrisy is what bothers me. And this is the thing, you know, Malcolm X pointed this out, you know, where he would say like he preferred the wolf to the fox. Like, you know, I would rather this racist Republican, whatever, I'd rather have a conversation with him because at least I know where he stands. What I don't want is the white liberal that's going to pretend to be my friend and never actually have my interest at heart. It's like, you know what? For somebody that says I hate your culture, whatever, and is going to tell me that to my face, we could probably be friends because at least I know what I'm working with and I can navigate that. What I can't stand is those people that are trying to have a commentary on my world and my culture, but are never going to be brave enough to go experience it themselves.
And most people are not like going to.
Yeah, and those people that'll tell me, I'm never like I've had people when I go to the little, we're not an official estuary, but the meetings, like I'll invite them to where my church is. When they're like, yeah, we're not going over there; it's not safe. That doesn't offend me. I'm like, I'm happy at least that they're being honest with me. What I don't want is the person saying, yeah, I'll come visit next week or next week, and they never do because secretly they don't want to admit that they're afraid to come where I am.
Yeah.
In the hip hop world, we call that keeping it real.
Keeping it a buck.
All of a sudden, keeping it real means being real fake.
It's impossible to keep it real online.
Yeah, because of the virtual nature, right? It's not embodied.
Remember, everybody, we want what's best for you.
Yeah, I used to hear that a lot. I mean, and that a lot of like my peers deconstructed, although they wouldn't call it that, because they heard that so much growing up. All these missionaries coming in, we want what's best for you, and a lot of times, no, what you really want to is to appease your own conscience.
You feel good about yourself.
Yeah, and so and then you have people. I reject that and everything that it came from, including the church.
Yeah, I'm very Mark and Manuel have kind of colonized me with this framing of differentiating between the meaning crisis people and the faith crisis people. And one thing that it's very clear to me is the immigrants. If you're less than 2 generations removed from your motherland, you're most likely going to have a faith crisis, not a meaning crisis, because most of the immigrant family are Christians, Muslims, like they've got a faith built into them, and even if you're unaware, it's in your DNA, and that's why the alliance that currently lies between BLM and LG, the alphabet people, as Dave Chappelle calls it, it's not going to stand because most of the blacks that are affirming are like the ones that are 3-4 generations like removed. The core of them are mostly religious, semi-religious, or like religious but not practicing. It's like there's the faith collision between BLM and the rainbow people, it's the fracture. It's on its way because behind closed doors, the conversations being had. I've got friends that are being in like the spoken word, artsy word. It's very LGBT, but when it's just the black people that are talking, they talk about how ridiculous most of the things that they agree to is, and it's I find that very interesting how that dynamic's gonna play out over the next. Whatever.
Yeah, that'll be it's interesting that you mentioned Chappelle and the Alphabet People, because I remember listening to Chappelle's last it wasn't his last one, it came out a couple years ago, stand-up special where he came out as not being from the hood.
Yeah,
that broke my heart a little bit. Because for a long time I thought of
he said he visited.
But I was like, education and intelligence, like when you think of like ghettos or the hood, you don't think of people being able to be educated and intelligent. So like me being able to be well spoken and like I've read a bit, I can hold my own in academic settings. Well, then you must not be where you're from. And to me, Chappelle was a sign. No, look at how smart this guy is. This guy is so stinking smart. And then it's like, oh, he's not from there. He's not from the projects. No, like, but then it also sees that he struggles with these two worlds a bit.
I think that's where I think Pac missed the mark. It could have been an emblem of that, because it does have a foot in both. Where like it could have been an emblem of someone that speak. It was well read. Like he was eloquent, and he was young, so he brash, arrogant, all of those. But he also had good questions to ask, and if he had turned those questions on himself and his own community, I think there would have been a lot of good to come for that. But yeah, that's pretty funny coming out not from the hood.
Yeah, but it opened my eyes to that, because one of the frustrations I've had with Chappelle sometimes is that when he gets into some of the race conversation, he points out a lot of real things, and I'm like, oh wait, he sees that. But then he's like, kind of like Pac, he starts to point out to some things that are logically inconsistent with that. Yeah. Because he's trying to be pro-black at the same time as being honest.
I think Paul is very right. The 60s owns us to this day, and especially the minority in the UK, it's BAME, black and Asian minority ethnic groups. It's like we're all still acting like it's the 60s, and we're the counterculture of the 60s, while we're still reveling, and we've not really come to terms with the changes that's occurred since then and how to move forward.
Yeah.
And I think Chappelle is one of those. Like, it's when it comes to black issues, they say it through the eyes of a Black Panther.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting though is I feel like he flirts with wokeism when it comes to race, but he doesn't go that far. Like, he's careful how far he'll go with it though, which to me is a sign that he's still wrestling with it. Like, I mean, one of the clearest examples is with Kanye. Like, he'll kind of criticize Kanye, but he won't like. I don't know that he'll like disavow Kanye. I haven't heard it, but he'll be like, yeah, Kanye kind of says some crazy stuff.
I mean, his last SNL appearance was post Kanye's most recent rant, and he does tutter that line, and that it's kind of like a big brother sort of telling off, nuts fully.
Yeah, exactly. He toes the line. He says, yeah, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, pretty much.
But he kind of doesn't really go that far against it.
Speaking of Kanye, I watched the first half of the Super Bowl. Why? I don't know. It was on TV. I think it's a stupid game. I don't understand why you lot call that football. It's not football, it's rugby. But anyway.
Yeah, the feet are rarely involved with the ball.
Yeah, it was actually a pretty good match from like the first half, and it looked good. But I saw the next day on Twitter the Rihanna's Super Bowl after performance, and as a Kanye fan, I was like, this is um. I felt like she was doing a similar thing to what Chappelle was doing, where she wasn't saying Kanye still bro Kanye, but she was in pretty much everything. Like the song she did and just the stadium layout that was from Kanye's Life of Pablo tour, and
Hmm.
like jacket, the way she was dressed. I was like, oh, okay, so there are like I'm fascinated by how many times Kanye will get kicked out of the black community and then like brought back in. And I think Rihanna's performance yesterday was another sign that Kanye's coming back, so they're bringing him
Hmm.
back slowly. But yeah, Kanye is my favorite because of that. Just he's I know he's now seen as controversial now, but I think he's been very consistent in the way he's been. He's wild, and he's only gotten more wild the more money he got. But he told you that was going to happen from the start.
Hmm.
That's what I like about him. He's so brutally honest about himself,
Hmm.
especially musically. I
Well,
don't
and
know.
that's what a lot. I mean, and that's the thing is that's part of why he won't go away because there there's this idea like people want to condemn what they believe is bad, except for in themselves, and they tend to exaggerate like, oh, this is a superstar, they would never do anything that bad, and it's just like, I mean, like when I point out that whole in the club thing, it's like I'm a pastor, and the fact that I'm a pastor that preaches against infidelity and sexual exploration and all that stuff, but I can't resist that beat. It's like that beat is like what Kanye is. It's like, and it's one of those things where there are aspects like the things that he talks about. I don't agree with them, but I know a lot of people that do. Um, and some of them, like the stuff that the anti-Semitic stuff. There's a lot of people that believe that also don't care necessarily. They'll be like, "Yeah, I got my friend that's a Jewish," and they'll say all kinds of awful things about him. But man, he's such a cool guy, or like whatever. Like there's so many logical inconsistencies in our lives,
Mhm. Yeah,
and I feel like there are enough of those to keep Kanye's career alive forever.
yeah, I think you're right, but I'm fascinated by just because how many it was the MAGA was meant to be what did it for him, and it started doing Sunday service, and people like, oh, I remember I remember the clip that brought him back of just him as on Sunday service jamming. People like, oh, that's good music, and then acted like if it wasn't cancelled a year ago, and now it's cancelled again. So I'm fascinated to see how it's going to come back. But yeah, Kanye's Peugeot's right. Keep watching. Don't
Keep
follow, but
watching the fool. Yeah, you don't have to listen to the fool, but just keep watching that guy. All right, man. Well, I am glad to have talked with you, but I gotta get some stuff done.
this has been fun. IT.
Oh, real quick before you go, is there any chance you'll ever be at one of the events?
I am watching very carefully how they're planning for the Israel events coming along because that seems like an opportunity that is too good to miss. I mean, last year, Paul, I was planning. I was one of the people that uh that was going to get a ticket to the Germany festival until I found out Paul would also be in London, and I was like, oh, I guess. So it was really cool to get a chance to meet Paul and do all of that, but that was very small and it was just UK lot. So a chance to meet this more of this little corner in person, embodied, but do it in Israel. That's far too tempting to resist. So I'm watching very carefully how the plan is going along. And you've just added a cipher potentially. So you just keep drawing me in and
All right. Well, we'll keep working on it and try to keep tempting you this way.
thanks for a really, really good conversation. It's really good to meet you.
Thank you. Same here. You have a good one.
You too.